meter runs out at 8:20, so you see me making a mad dash.
Oh, can you just see that you think the camera started recording and the audio started? Yeah.
Thanks.
I know you typically have such a bad mouth. Too. Just wanted to give you a warning there.
I think she wants to take a photo of us.
Oh, okay.
Good evening. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My name is Nancy Lopez. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Council of Lawyers. The Washington Council of Lawyers is a voluntary bar association. We promote pro bono and public interest work. We have members who are law students, lawyers, and legal professionals from government agencies, from private law firms, and from public interest organizations, because we've found that when you bring people who are committed to increasing the access to justice together from different sectors of the legal community, very, very good things happen. So for over 41 years, the Washington Council of Lawyers has been a public interest voice in the legal community. We are delighted to have you here tonight for the Pathways to Postgraduate Public Interest Fellowships. We are grateful to our co-sponsors, NELP, who has done a tremendous amount of the work in putting this program together, and Georgetown University Law Center, who was gracious enough to provide us with this space so that we could accommodate a much larger audience than we otherwise would have been able to. I want to encourage you to consider becoming a member of the Washington Council of Lawyers. As a law student, membership is just $15 for a year, and then with that you will learn about events and trainings, programs, and networking opportunities, and you will get a copy of our monthly public interest jobs clearinghouse, which will be delivered to your email inbox and tell you about public interest jobs in DC and around the country at a variety of different levels of experience. The council is excited to be going social. You can now like our Facebook page, and we will be live tweeting tonight's event with the Twitter handle @WashLawyers. So if you are a Twitter user, feel free to see if you can access and tweet with us tonight.
Only if it's nice things.
We're also going to be videotaping the program, and so if you have friends or colleagues who couldn't be here, please check back to our website, and we hope to have a link to a video so that people can see the program if they weren't here. And to that extent, when we get to the questions portion, I think we need to ask people to come down to the microphones if they have questions so that your question can be captured as well as the answer. I am delighted to be able to introduce our panelists. First, we have Steve Grum. He is the Director of Public Service Initiatives at NELP. He is wise about all things public interest and will be our moderator tonight. Next to him is Chin Lee. He is the Legal Director at the Legal Aid Society of DC. He also is a former Skadden Fellow. He will bring us the perspective of a host organization in the fellowship process. Nita Mazumder is next to him. She is the program manager of law school relations at Equal Justice Works. Equal Justice Works runs a fabulous fellowship program, and she'll be able to tell you about that program and the application process for that. Tim McManus follows. He is the vice president for education and outreach at the Partnership for Public Service, and he will tell us about the Public Service Fellows Program, perhaps less well known in the legal community, but an equally important fellowship program for you to consider as you're thinking about that as a postgraduate opportunity. And then finally, what would a fellowship program be without the perspective of an actual fellow? Devi Rao is a Skadden Fellow, and she is at the National Women's Law Center, and so she will be able to speak to you about her experience and the application process with the Skadden Fellowship Program. Thank you all for coming. We hope you will stay and for some refreshments and networking after the program. And now please join me in thanking our panelists for being here and speaking.
Thanks very much, Nancy. Good evening again, all. As Nancy mentioned, I'm Steve Grum. I work with NALP. Just by way of very brief introduction, we are a member association for typically the folks who work in your career services offices at law schools, and also for their counterparts who work doing lawyer hiring and lawyer professional development at law firms and in government agencies. Our mission, put simply, is basically to give you the career tools and resources that you need, I think, to one, understand the job market best, and two, to make yourselves the best possible job candidates that you can be. And that's a theme that we're going to return to again and again this evening as we get into the program. On a more personal note, and I suspect that my counterparts on the panel agree with me on this, you all are tomorrow's public interest and pro bono advocates, and we all, because of that, have an investment in you being those best candidates and going on to careers that you find fruitful and productive. So we're very, very happy to participate in programs like this. When it comes to working in poverty law or in some other way helping as an attorney those people who are on society's margins, what we're going to learn tonight is that there are really few better points of entry than postgraduate public interest fellowships. And likewise, for those who are interested in careers in federal government work, the Presidential Management Fellows Program, or PMF, as well as a handful of other newer fellowship programs, are wonderful both points of entry and great places to start because they offer a lot of vertical room to move up. A lot of PMFs stay in government past their time and end up being leaders in government a few years down the road. So we're very, very glad at being Washington. We figured we must incorporate a federal dimension to our program tonight, and we're going to be very happy to do that toward the latter half of the program. Now, as you may guess, with me having said that about both nonprofit and government fellowships, they're very coveted, they're sought after, and they're very competitive, the application processes for them, which is exactly what brings us here tonight. As I mentioned, our goal tonight, the five of us, is to make you the best candidates you can be by offering several different vantage points on how fellowship proposals are best crafted by you and by your host organizations, and then on how to get into where to interface with government fellowships and how to make yourselves the best candidates for those as well. Before we plunge in, I would like to get a sense, you having met us just briefly, of who's all in the room tonight. So by show of hands, how many folks here are going to be 2Ls when you head back to school after the summer? Okay, a little more than half. And how many are rising 3Ls? Okay, that's, wow, just about everybody. Any law graduates who are also considering fellowships in the room, or any other group I haven't covered yet? Okay. A couple? Great. All right. How many are in law school outside the DC area and here for the summer? Whoa, welcome. Wow, that's a good number. Okay, great. Just out of curiosity, how many are in law school in the Philadelphia area? All right. This is the part where I'd usually say go Phils, but we're having such an abysmal season that I'm just going to move right along from baseball references altogether. As for what we're going to do tonight, we have a handful of different things we're going to cover. I think the easiest thing is just for those of you, particularly for the rising 2Ls who have come here saying, I want to learn all about making myself the best candidate, but first, square one, what is a fellowship? So I think Nita and I can start by just kind of defining what exactly a postgraduate public interest fellowship is. I typically think of this as having maybe 5 components to it, so I'll tick them off for you. So a postgraduate public interest fellowship would be a term-limited opportunity. This is what distinguishes it from a normal job where you get hired and then you quit or whatever. So it's limited to 1 or 2 years typically. Term-limited, it's typically for newer legal professionals. There are not age limits on these fellowships, but they typically tend to recruit from folks who are recently, if not immediately, out of law school. Third, a fellowship gives you an opportunity to act with considerable autonomy, and maybe more autonomy than a staff attorney right out of law school might have as well, because of the nature of the fellowship project that you're working on. And then also, you're going to have access as a fellow to professional development tools. So particularly, as we'll hear with Equal Justice Works and Skadden fellowships, one of the main components built in is not just a chance to have you go out and practice and work with clients, but also to develop yourself. And they do a lot of educational and networking programming around those fellowships to help you build as a professional during those 2-year fellowships. So, Nita, having given that definition of a fellowship, we should probably distinguish from organization-based fellowships and project-based fellowships like the ones we're going to focus on tonight.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. The fellowships models usually fall into organization versus project-based. The organization-based fellowships are basically job descriptions by host organizations. They're posted at the host sites. I'd like to analogize it to our Equal Justice Works AmeriCorps Legal Fellowship Program. Basically, the host site administers the fellowship. They post the job description. You don't really have anything to do in terms of creating a project or anything like that. I would like to put in a little shameless plug for our AmeriCorps program. We do have, if you are a 3L or recent graduate, you can apply now. We have 18 positions across the country. If you go to our website, equaljusticeworks.org, and you go to the postgraduate tab, you'll see all the different areas where we have open positions: California, Maryland, Ohio, Texas, Washington, West Virginia. And some of the core priorities of the AmeriCorps and that are being funded currently are foreclosure prevention, veterans issues, disaster relief, and medical legal partnerships, which is a hot topic these days. So basically, you apply directly to the host site, and a lot of these positions you can find on PS LawNet. And the host site is the one who actually does the hiring, the evaluations, provides the training, things like that. For the AmeriCorps fellowships, you would apply now to start in this year, in between August 1st and September 30th. So for any 3Ls or rising 3Ls, or for people who are recently graduated, this is something that you may want to consider if you're still seeking something. For the project-based fellowships, it's a great concept because you actually get to envision and create a concept, a project where you then approach a host organization. And it's usually funded by a third party, what we call a sponsor. And what I like to analogize it to is our traditional fellowship, or what we call the Equal Justice Works fellowships. It's, as Steve said, pretty competitive. For this year's class in 2012, we have 50 fellows out of 360 applicants. For the class of 2013, we're hoping to have more than that. You would apply in the second semester of your 3L year, or as a recent graduate. You would apply, as a rising 3L, because it is 1 year ahead. So you would apply now for the 2013 class. And basically, with the project-based fellowships, PS LawNet has a fellowship sponsor a category in its job postings where it's specifically for organizations, and maybe Steve can elaborate, that are looking to identify candidates for project ideas. So if you can't really think about, where a host organization you might like to approach, PS LawNet is a great idea to think about for that. And also our website has various various fellow profiles on its tab where you can look at where past fellows have been hosted. It gives the law school, their year, a description of the project, and our project issues are very broad, from immigration to veterans to women's rights to human rights to civil rights to, it runs the gamut. If you look at our website, you'll be able to see that. And most of our, the traditional fellowship program is the largest postgraduate fellowship program in the country. It's a 2-year commitment, and the host organization has to be a nonprofit 501c3. The number of fellowships varies according to the number of sponsors we get. 2 stats I'd like to throw out at you is that over 75% of our traditional fellows who complete the Equal Justice Works Fellowship stay on in public interest law after their fellowship has ended, and over 80% of the projects that were started by the Equal Justice Works Fellows are sustained by the host organization. So those are 2 great statistics that we'd like to throw out at you. Would you like to go on into the main funders of the fellowships, or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So for the Equal Justice Works Fellowships, the funders can be either law firms, corporations, bar associations, individuals who may or may not remain anonymous. And another trend that we're seeing actually is co-sponsorships with corporations and their clients, such as Arnold and Porter and BP, or Ropes and Gray and Pfizer. And a lot of the funding partners, that we call sponsors, they will have preferences, either as to geographic areas or particular areas of interest that they would like to fund. If we know that a sponsor has a particular interest in either a geographic area or a specific practice area, we will put that on our website. And in fact, if you go to our website, you'll see a whole host of geographic areas and also the types of practices that are being funded. So it behooves you to go to our website to look at that. And ultimately, it's the sponsor's decision who they want to hire. Equal Justice Works plays a part in terms of we help with the selection process in that we will provide for the sponsors a slate of candidates according to their preferences, and then the sponsors are the ones who will call you for interviews. And when we go later into the meat of the program, I can tell you about an interview that I sat with at an international large law firm who was a sponsor for a particular project, and some of the questions they asked, and also how to craft the best proposal. So I'll get into the meat of that a little later.
Great, thank you much. And having heard now about Equal Justice Works, let's turn to Skadden, which is the other primary project-based fellowship funding conduit in the country. Davey?
Thank you. You guys can hear me? Great. So Skadden is very similar to Equal Justice Works in that it's a project-based fellowship, and you need to craft a proposal in partnership with an organization. The structure is a little bit different. Skadden itself funds, Skadden Arps, the law firm that you may have heard of, funds the program. So all of the applications go through the Skadden Fellowship Foundation, which is related to the law firm. Members of the law firm sit on the fellowship committee, and then there are some outside people as well. And so all of the applications go to Skadden, the Skadden Fellowship Foundation, and they're the ones to select the fellowships that receive funding. So there's not the sort of sponsor angle that there is with Equal Justice Works. So Skadden's been around since the late 80s. It's focused on providing legal services to the poor. It's a little more restricted in terms of what they will fund as opposed to Equal Justice Works, and I'll talk about that a little later. There are just a few areas that they won't fund directly. So it's a 2-year program. And again, you work at a nonprofit. The Skadden Fellowship Foundation pays your salary and gives you the benefits that you would get if you were an attorney at the organization. You don't have an offer to work at Skadden. You're not obligated or expected to work there. In fact, I don't think it really happens. I think the statistic is that 90% of people who have had Skadden fellowships are still in public service. So there's not really the same interest to go to the law firm. Although it is a great law firm. So the really excellent thing about the Skadden program is that it provides loan repayment assistance. For those of you who don't have schools that have LREP programs, the 2 years while you're in your fellowship, the foundation will pay for your law school debt. And some people, and I think this is true for Equal Justice Works, some people end up, after their 2 years, staying on at their organization. Some people don't. It's really a matter of finding the capacity within the organization, raising money, et cetera. So, Steve sort of referenced the fact that fellowships are one of the few ways to get a job at a nonprofit right out of school. And it's a good entry into an organization that you might want to have a sort of longer than 2-year career with. The application is limited to right after your 3L year or after a clerkship or consecutive clerkships. It's not something you can apply to later. They really want sort of people at the very outset of their career. And I'll talk a little bit later about the fellowship proposal. But I will say that the applications are due October 1st to Skadden. And so that means for those of you who are rising 3Ls, if you wanted to start a fellowship right after you graduate, then you would need to start thinking about that now. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Oh, and there are between 25 and 30 fellows selected every year.
Great. Thank you both very much. And just as a housekeeping matter, you should have a half-page handout which has information about application deadline dates for both Equal Justice Works and for Skadden. As I understand it, needed the class of 2013 Equal Justice Works fellowship application just became available.
Yes, it opened this past Monday, and it's going to stay open until September 18th.
Great. Okay. So with that definition of a project-based fellowship, which involves you crafting a proposal and seeking out funding, as opposed to an organization-based fellowship, which looks a little more like a job because you don't have to go out and find the funding yourself, let's talk a little bit about the value of doing a project-based fellowship in addition to some of the points we've already mentioned. And I can think of no one better to do that than someone who has been a fellow and whose career was launched into legal services from that. So Chin, let's turn to you.
Sure. Well, as you've already heard, the number one reason to do any fellowship, but a project-based fellowship just as good, is so that you can be employed by a public interest organization. So as you know, it is very rare for public interest organizations to have job postings, especially for entry-level attorneys. And so most of the way that you can just get in the door at all for most of these organizations is through a fellowship. Not all organizations. Certainly there are those that are able to hire staff attorneys straight out of law school or off of clerkships. But for many of the organizations, this really is your way in. And for those that don't have site-based fellowships, meaning they're advertising that they have a position sponsored by someone else, but that they can hire you for. This gives you an opportunity to go to an organization that you have an interest in, that does the kind of work that you want to do, and to ask them, would you be willing to be a host site for me if I with your help, put together an application? Now, when I was in law school, I thought that this meant that organizations out there would be very hungry to accept people like me who want to work for them, essentially at no cost to them. But it turns out that it is quite challenging for the organization as well. And we'll talk a little bit about the organization side, but just so you know, just because you come essentially paid or partially paid if you get this fellowship doesn't mean that organizations are going to be chomping at the bit to hire you, because they have to consider their own infrastructure, their ability to support you, other people like you who are coming and knocking at their door who would love to work for them as well. And so although it seems like this is an opportunity that any employer should jump at, you should come with a level of humility about wanting to do this kind of site-based fellowship, and just really come prepared. And as I said, I'll talk a little bit more about what you can do to prepare yourself in a bit. Another good reason to consider this kind of fellowship is because you will have a hand in, or at least have a very good sense of what you will be doing when you get there. So because these site-based projects require you to put together a proposal, and in many instances, if not all instances, you will be very involved in putting together that proposal, you'll have a really good understanding of what kind of work you're going to be doing when you get there, and also hopefully a hand in crafting what that work is. So if you really want to do a certain kind of representation or advocacy, you could certainly express those interests to the organization. And again, hopefully if it all works out and they can support you and have the capacity to do that work, then you can do more of what it is that you think you want to do going in. A third benefit of doing a site-based a project-based fellowship is that these fellowship programs, and we've talked about Equal Justice Works and Skadden, both have a support network. So you will have a class of fellows, you will get to know your fellows, you'll know people outside of your own organization. Some of these sponsors are able to support you with training, with conferences. You'll have an opportunity to network across other people doing similar or even different kinds of public interest work. And so that is also going to be a really enormous and great resource for you as a new lawyer practicing public interest law. And then finally, the back end of that is that as you wrap up your fellowship and you've developed this network of friends and colleagues, both within and outside of the organization, you'll find that throughout your career, you may come across folks again, even whether they are people who are in your class or around your class, or just other fellows from that same sponsor. So you may apply for a job a decade from now, and the hiring person is an Equal Justice Works fellow, and you were too, and that gives you something to talk about. Or you're looking for a job, and you kind of run through the list of former fellows or your former fellows in your class, and you kind of find people who can open the door to you for another organization or introduce you to an area. You're moving to Washington State from Washington, D.C., and that gives you an instant network to reach out to in terms of people to contact. So I know in my own career, for instance, when I came to the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia, there were two fellows who had previously been fellows at different times from me. And that was really, I think, comforting for me to be able to have that network and know those people, and it made a real difference.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Thanks, Jim. Why don't we bore in a little bit on some of those best practices that we referenced earlier? How do you actually go about crafting these proposals? What are some of the tips and tricks and things you want to know as you're going through that process? And Nita, why don't I start with you, and we can just run through some of the things that you'd offer for advice for Equal Justice Works proposals.
Okay, sure. So basically, there are 4 components to the project-based fellowship, the traditional Equal Justice Works fellowship. There's the project, the candidate, the host organization, and the sponsor. So for the project, you want to envision where do you see yourself working for the next 2 years, because it is a 2-year commitment. And for yourself, you don't necessarily need a personal connection to the host organization, but I can tell you that most of the compelling applications, successful applications, if they don't have a personal connection, they are able to say why they want to work with this particular host organization and why they want to work with this particular target community. We once had a domestic violence victim who wanted to work with other domestic violence victims on these types of issues. So obviously she had a personal connection. You need not have a personal connection as long as you explain some type of, compelling interest to the community. I just also want to say with the host organization, you would approach the host organization, which has to be a nonprofit, and the host organization is responsible for your training. They have to be able to supervise you. They have to have a history of either working on that issue or something closely related. They have to be able to pay your salary and benefits. We've talked about the sponsor, the last part. I will tell you that most of the traditional fellowships are sponsored in major urban areas. It's rare that we have sponsors who either don't have a geographic preference or they say the rural areas are fine. So most of the sponsors do have geographic preferences for the major urban markets. I just also want to, before I give you a top 10 tips, some of the benefits, like Debbie said, for Skadden is that Equal Justice Works pays up to $41,000. If the host organization that you select pays more for a similarly situated attorney, they cover the difference. We also provide loan repayment assistance through the income-based repayment program. You get benefits that any other similarly situated attorney at the host organization would get. You get health insurance, and you also get access to this great network of fellows. You get exposed to not only other traditional fellows, but AmeriCorps fellows as well. We provide a leadership development training at our conference and career fair, which I hope some of you will be attending in October. We provide hands-on skills workshop for both leadership training, media relations, fundraising, anything to make sure that you have a successful fellowship and public interest career. If you didn't catch all those things about the nuts and bolts, I direct you to our webinar that's coming up actually this Tuesday. You can register on our website at 2 p.m. and it's being given by Sarah Snick, who's our fellowships program manager, and she'll give you an overview of the traditional fellowships, discuss the components, past fellowship projects, and you'll be able to email her directly in the webcast. So she's really the guru of the fellowships, and she'll be the one presenting this webinar. Crafting the best proposals, that's why you're all here. Preference will be given to projects that basically will impact the highest number of people, that can be sustained after the 2-year fellowship ends, and that can be replicated in other communities. And some of the locations and issues where we anticipate funding, where we've already talked to 2013 sponsors, can be found on our website. So I'm going to give you a top 10 tips for crafting the best proposal. I'm not going to be as funny as David Letterman, so I apologize in advance. But the first thing is, like I said, envision your dream job. Where do you want to work? And you want to make sure that your personal and professional goals and experience will fit with the project, with the discrete project that you're conceptualizing in your mind. And one of the key factors that Equal Justice Works looks at in a successful application is the fit among the candidate and the host organization. In terms of the host organization being able to provide the supervision, the training, making sure that it's financially sustainable, things like that. And then again, with the candidate, how their personal experience ties in with what the work of the host organization is. You want to make sure that your proposal addresses a legal problem in a novel way. My second tip is researching the prospective host organization. And I'll give another plug to PS LawNet for that. They're a very good resource for researching the host organization. And you can also look at our website and see what host organizations have previously hosted fellows for the tradition of fellowships. So you want to ask a couple of questions before you approach a host organization. Have you interned with a particular host organization before? If you haven't, do you know anybody who has? Can you talk to some fellows who have worked there? What's their staff size? How do they conduct their training? You might want to consider looking at their annual report, looking at media clips off Lexis or Westlaw, meeting with a staff attorney at the organization. Make sure that your host organization and you are on the same page about the parameters of the project and that it's something actually that the host organization has an interest in. So then tip number 3 is approaching the host organization and working with them to develop a project proposal. You may take the lead in crafting the proposal, but definitely you want to work with them in terms of, the scope of the proposal and what is the specific issue and the specific problem being addressed. Because I will tell you that the application, the more specific you are, the better chance you have at having a successful application and being called in for an interview. So you want to make sure that you have a thoughtful plan for adequate orientation and training and supervision and support. Make sure that the host organization is financially sustainable so they can pay your salaries and the FICA, the taxes, everything like that. And make sure that your project fits within the host organization's mission statement and their actual work. Your application should show that you've built this really great relationship with the host organization. And I will tell you that there have been instances where the host organization and the candidate have worked together so closely that even though they may not have picked up a fellowship, they have picked up a staff attorney position from them. So, you will, work together closely with the host organization, and that should be reflected in your proposal. The fourth tip is to demonstrate a pressing need in a specific community. Again, you don't want to be vague, you don't want to be general. You want to definitely highlight what it is, what's the target community. 2 instances of 2012 Fellows projects were providing needed asylum representation and outreach to African and Middle Eastern immigrant women and girls fleeing gender-based violence. And then also another project was serving to protect Latino consumers from predatory auto financing practices in order to preserve family and community wealth. But like I said before, on our website, you'll see that the past projects that have been funded have run the gamut. So tip number 5 is know your community, obtain stakeholder buy-in. Like I said, you don't need a personal connection, but you do need to demonstrate that you've thought about the challenges that may arise and also a framework for dealing with these challenges. You can strengthen a proposal by showing that you've already laid the groundwork for a project, maybe because you've talked to community leaders or you've reviewed a community assessment, and you're drawing on, the special needs that assessment has targeted. Maybe you're getting input from local leaders. So all these things should be reflected in your proposal. Tip number 6 is you want to propose realistic and targeted strategies. You want to be able to achieve your goals. You don't want something so lofty that it's unattainable. At the same time, you don't want it to be too narrow or unremarkable. You want to consider whether the project will make a real difference in your issue area. And do the proposed strategies, do they make sense to you? And is it a good timetable in which to accomplish that? For instance, if you propose filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of migrant farm workers, your proposal should demonstrate that your host organization has the adequate training and supervision, but also has a history of representing migrant farm workers. So you want to research what's already been tried and successfully has been achieved. Tip number 7 is you want to propose a project, not a staff attorney position. Obviously, all nonprofits could profit from more staff attorney positions. But the purpose of the Equal Justice Works Fellowships is to provide leadership opportunities for our fellows and also to make sure that they have ownership of a discrete project that can be tracked and measured, and that complements the host organization's mission statement.
And if I may here, Nita, just to support something that Nita is saying, this is all the more reason why you need to remain in the driver's seat as you're putting a proposal together. So of course you're working with the host organization, but this really needs to be your proposal and not theirs. They can do a lot to have input. They can certainly help you with understanding community need and so forth, but it really needs to come from you. And funders will be able to distinguish when a fellow, out of their own sense of passion and professional mission, is putting a fellowship proposal out there, as opposed to something that feels like it might be well-intentioned nonprofit fishing for another staff attorney position.
Thank you. So number 8 is demonstrate long-term impact and sustainability. Like I said, 80% of the fellows projects are sustained beyond the 2-year commitment. And you want to show that you impact a large amount of people, how you'll do that, and also that how will the organization sustain this after the fellowship commitment has ended. And impact can be, measured in a variety of ways. The number of residents educated, the number of volunteer attorneys recruited, the number of clients represented. So you want to take this big picture view. Tip number 9 is show commitment to the work. We place a high value on the candidate personal statement, and you want to show more than just simply reciting your resume again. You really want to show your connection to the work, and that starts in law school. Classes you take, organizations that you're a member of, clinical experiences, volunteer work that you've done, maybe even in college. We believe that all of this, including your background and accomplishments, really determine if you'll be a successful fellow and whether you'll have a long-term career in public interest. You want to ask, what is, why would I be the best fit for this particular project? What do I bring to the table? Make sure you have answers for that, and that's reflected in your application. And the last tip I have is you want to get extensive feedback. Don't develop your application in a vacuum. You definitely want to seek other people's support in crafting this proposal. Maybe once it's crafted, you want to show it to your career service or your public interest counselors. Get feedback from them. Have them propose tough questions so that you can strengthen your proposal. Because I will tell you, like I said, 50 out of 360, it's a competitive process, but it's a great credential to have on your resume. So you really want to stand out and have a really strong proposal. In terms of the application itself, the 3 factors, candidate, host, and project, they are scored on a scale of 1 to 10. Of those 3, the candidate and project are weighted at 35%, and the host organization is weighted at 30%. Your personal statement is very important because this is the first thing that the sponsor is going to read about you. Like I said, we have alumni fellows who are actually doing a lot of the reviewing of the applications along with Equal Justice Works employees. And then we send a slate of candidates to the sponsors based on what their preferences were. And then from that pool, they select who they'd like to interview. So, your personal statement is very important. You really want to make sure that you really craft that in terms of what your connection is to this target community, or what your connection is to the host organization, if you summered there or interned there or whatever. So that's kind of a nuts and bolts kind of thing. I want to put in one more shameless plug, that if you didn't catch all this, we're actually having a webinar on August 6th at 1 p.m. on how to create the best application for your project-based fellowship, the traditional Equal Justice Works Fellowship. And that's also going to be hosted by Sarah Snick, and you can also email questions to her directly during the webcast. So you definitely, if you're interested in this, you definitely want to make sure you tune into that webcast.
Cool. Thank you very much, Nita. Webinar notwithstanding, and I encourage you to tune in for that. That was a very comprehensive overview, so thanks. Davey, turning to someone who just recently did all this, except for the SCADN, tell us a little bit about how it went from your vantage point.
Okay, so big caveat is that I don't know exactly what they're looking for. I can tell you about advice I've received and things that seemed to work well for me and others. But I don't review applications, so I'm not really sure exactly how that process works. So I came with 5 tips and not 10. So I'm going to tell you my 5 tips. They're going to sound a lot like Nita's. Then I'm going to tell you 5 ways that I totally messed the process up myself, because it's going to sound, you're going to be a little overwhelmed with all the stuff that you need to do to get the process going. And I'm going to tell you that even if you don't do everything you're supposed to, it could still work out, so not to freak out. Definitely still apply. Okay, so number 1, think about what your dream job is. That's what's so exciting about the project-based fellowship as opposed to any other model. You get to basically craft what you want to do for the next 2 years. If you think about your dream job and it's not working at a nonprofit, then maybe you don't want to apply for a fellowship. If you don't want to work with poor people, then maybe you don't want to apply to a fellowship. But to start brainstorming exactly what it is you do want to do, go through your resume. Think about your internships, your clinics, your volunteer experiences, papers you've written, newspaper articles that you've read that have been really interesting, and draw on your own life experience because, obviously we all have a diversity of backgrounds and, the reason why you're passionate about certain issues based on your own experience really comes through as genuine and committed in applications and in interviews. So number 2, start now. For those of you who are rising 3Ls, now is the time to be really thinking seriously about this process. The deadline to apply to the SCADN Fellowship is October 1st, but as Chin mentioned, there's this sort of earlier deadline where you have to find an organization, and some of those organizations routinely every year will host will put an application together with someone for the Equal Justice and SCADN fellowships. And so, they get many applications, and so they have these some of them have rigid time schedules on which you need to apply if you want to be considered by one of those organizations. Okay. Yes. So number 3, do your homework. Who at your school has received a fellowship before? Has the organization you're interested in ever hosted a fellow? It's okay if they haven't, but generally, if there are a handful of organizations that routinely get fellows, and that's a good sign because you know that the organization has been given the seal of approval from Equal Justice Works or SCADN. So a good source of information is the SCADN website. It has all the Skadden Fellows going back to 1988, which I think was when it was started. It lists their name, what organization they were hosted at, where geographically that organization is, what law school they went to, and a description of their project. And it's searchable by different categories. So it's a really great way to sort of connect with someone from your school who may have had a fellowship, or someone doing a project that's similar to what you want to propose, or at an organization that you're thinking about, et cetera. Okay, so design a smart project, number 4. That sounds, it's probably easier said than done. The application itself is pretty basic. There's sort of, you fill in your information on a piece of paper, your sort of coursework, et cetera, and you submit 3 essays. They're very short. There's a word limit. And then your organization writes a letter about the project. And there's no word limit on that. So that's the time to really sort of get into depth about what you would be doing, and you ask questions, the same that Nita talked about, right? Why you? Why the organization? Why this population? And sort of bringing all those together, drawing on your experience and pulling out bits of your resume that works with that narrative that you're drawing. So similar to Equal Justice Works, Skadden likes to fund new projects. They like to be sort of at the cutting edge of legal services. At the same time, it has to be something that is related enough to the organization's current work that you can sort of tell a story about why that organization is well suited to host you in this new and exciting project. There are certain things that Skadden does not fund, and you should know about those. They don't fund repro work or immigration or criminal defense. But people work with populations in immigration detention who need health care, or they work on reentry issues for people who are coming out of prison. So you can get at these same populations, but in a different way. You're just not allowed to, in theory, you're not allowed to represent people in immigration court.
And just as a for instance, there a couple of years ago, the Public Defender Service here in the District of Columbia hosted a Skadden Fellow. I don't think he's the only one they've hosted. His work was obviously not in the courtroom doing indigent defense, but rather I think he focused on some issue related to using forensic evidence in defense work, and it was almost more of a policy-oriented job. So even if your interest does cross into the criminal defense realm, Skadden may still be an opportunity for you.
And you should definitely, this is again where the website comes in handy, because you can look at people who have been at PDS offices and see what their projects look like, and same with immigration work. The ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, for instance, has a Skadden Fellow every other year or so. So it's not like they just won't touch those issues. Okay, and number 5, my 5th tip, is just 3 words. Susan Butler Plum. So those of you who are chuckling know that Susan Butler Plum is the director of the Skadden Fellowship Foundation. She has been doing that for a while. That's her full-time job. She's incredibly, incredibly committed to the fellowship program and to fellows. And she, works on the applications every step of the way. So I was told many times by many different people to, reach out to her, call her, have a couple questions, have an idea about your project, have a couple questions for her, but she needs to have some association with your name when your application comes through the door. There are many people who apply, and it's just one of those things that people tell you to do, and if everyone's telling everyone to do it, then everyone should just do it, because if you don't, then, it's just another thing you don't do. So,
but not everyone does, and I think that's why it's such an important point. The prospect is a little bit intimidating, knowing that Susan has a lot of control over this process and takes it awfully, awfully seriously and does a very good job at it. But it can be very intimidating just to cold call her and mention who you are and that you have a few questions. She loves to take the questions, and as Davies pointed out, it's better off that she has some name association than doesn't.
Right. And she's all business, but that doesn't mean she doesn't like your idea. She's going to listen. She's going to tell you what she thinks. I called her and I had a question, and she just obliterated me. But it was very helpful. It helped me make a better proposal. So those are my 5 tips. Now, those all sound like a lot, including start now, you're missing deadlines as you're sitting here. But then I'm going to tell you 5 ways that I messed the process up, to just sort of let you know that there are different ways to go about it. So first, I missed these deadlines to apply to organizations. I was going into a clerkship, so I was taking the bar exam, and I didn't want to think about applying for a new job before I'd even started my clerkship. So I just buried my head in the sand, and I studied for the bar, and I took the bar, and then I emerged from that, and I realized that I had missed the deadlines to apply to the sort of handful of organizations that have these earlier processes where you apply to be to develop a project with them. So that was a bummer, but it worked out. So number 2, I did not go to the Skadden website except to pull off the application. The Skadden website is very useful, and you should mine it for connections, and you should get ideas, and you should, use it, because it shows you what good projects look like and what types of organizations have been successful, and it is a helpful place to go. And I didn't do it. It didn't occur to me. So number 3, I had no connection to my host organization. I had spent my summers in San Francisco, and I wanted to apply in DC. So that was a problem. I went to school in New York. I didn't know any organizations here, really. So I reached out to someone who went to my law school, who's sort of an advisor, public interest advisor, and I said, help, I need you to talk to me about organizations in DC. And she said, oh, well, our organization does fellowships. And I said, okay, pass me along. And then she passed me to the person who does education and employment. That's a group at my organization. I had a lot of employment history. And she said, well, do you have an employment idea, an idea for an employment project? And I said, well, no. What do you need? So I didn't have a project. So that was probably mistake number 4. But we ended up coming up with something together, and it ended up being something that I was very excited about, and something that I could tell a story about based on my experience. Although I had not worked for the organization, I had not worked on this particular issue, you can sort of be creative about you know how to write resumes and cover letters, right? It's about pulling pieces together. And then the last way that I almost messed things up badly was I was driving up to my interview in LA from San Diego, and there's traffic, and then there's no traffic, and I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful, I'm gonna miss this. And then I go faster, and then the lights come on, and then I get a speeding ticket. Anyway, so I almost missed the interview. So anyway, these are all sort of, I messed up at some places. It worked out. There are many different routes. Nita's probably like, oh my God, we don't want to know this stuff from that end. But you guys can, if you start now, if you start thinking, you can really come up with a great, interesting project of an organization that you like. And, I hope you use some of our tips, but you don't need them all to succeed.
Steve, do you mind if I'm in listening to Debbie's remarks, I just have a couple of, not that we're comparing Equal Justice Works to Skadden, but she did remind me of a few things I just wanted to tell you. Unlike some other fellowships, which will go unnamed, we do not have a GPA cutoff. we don't require transcripts. Your project description, I don't think I can stress it enough. You really want to think of it like as a thesis. Equal Justice Works fellowship staff, like Sarah Snick, our program manager for fellowships, is here to help you answer any application-related questions. Like Skadden's fellowship, we also do not fund standard criminal defense work, but if there's something maybe that addresses like systemic issues in the system, like with the federal sentencing guidelines or something like that, that would be considered. If you receive an offer for a judicial clerkship, unfortunately, we aren't able to defer the fellowship because our funding varies every year, and you are disqualified from even applying if you've been a full-time employee of the host organization that you want to work with, or if you've had a prior major fellowship like a Skadden fellowship. However, if you have a fellowship through your law school or a smaller fellowship or an AmeriCorps fellowship, you would not be disqualified. Also, if you did contract work for the host organization, you were an unpaid intern or a summer intern, you would also not be disqualified. So I just wanted to clarify a few things that kind of came to mind when I was listening to Debbie's remarks. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Thank you both. And now we've heard a few different vantage points on fellowships. Let's hear the final and arguably one of the most important ones, which is from the employer's vantage point. So Chin, let's return to you.
Well, perhaps not surprisingly, I think that the same tips you've heard are going to apply from the employer's point of view, and so I'm not going to really go over them. But I did sit here and look at my notes and tick them off as they were being said, and I thought, if anything, I was feeling intimidated, and as Davey said, I certainly didn't do the vast majority, maybe the vast majority of these things myself, and so I just want to give you a little bit of comfort in terms of some of the things you've said. It is ideal but not necessary that you've spent your 2L or some other period of time at an organization. So we, for instance, have fellows who have summered with us or spent a semester with us. We also have fellows who haven't. And so don't feel like if you didn't summer at the organization or spend some time there that you are disqualified. I actually, myself, I did my Skadden Fellow at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I applied to be a fellow there my 2L year, and they didn't even respond to my application. They didn't even acknowledge it. And I ended up being a Skadden Fellow there, so that stuff happens. I think you do want to, I do agree that you want to look for an in some way, and that's a really broad in. Be creative. If you don't know someone who's summered there, if you don't know someone who's worked there, talk to your professors who specialize in that area, if it's family law or if it's civil rights or whatever. My in was my professor whose co-clerk had previously worked there but didn't work there anymore, and then put me in touch with someone who worked there. So it was like 3 degrees of separation, and it was still a perfectly okay in. On the part about knowing your organization, I also agree from an organizational point of view. And I think that's important both when you write the letter and also when you show up if you get an interview. When you write the letter, I know you're probably possibly spraying out more than one letter, but try not to say generic things, try not to make mistakes and forget to replace the organization. There are all these mistakes that you think are, would never happen, but it's amazing how many applications we get where, it says that I'd really like to work at, name another organization. So really, try to tailor these as best you can, and then when you come to the interview, don't say you love to do auto repo work when the organization doesn't do, is never done and doesn't do auto repo work, right? So, defense work. So, know something about the organization. But that said, you don't have to know everything about the organization. When I applied, my organization didn't even have a website, and so it was very hard to get your hands on an annual report or whatever. So I talked to a few people, but this is another example where I didn't do the level of homework that certainly you might be able to do today, but I still think you don't need to pull the GuideStar reports and read how much the executive director makes. And there's a point at which there's diminishing marginal returns.
I definitely advise against mentioning the executive director's salary at all at any point in the process.
That might be true too. And then finally, just in terms of making you feel more comfortable, a lot of the things have been said, and I think they're accurate, but you don't have to have like the most novel legal theory ever, affecting the largest number of people ever, solving the world's deepest problems ever. I mean, I think that, of course, we want the organizations and the fellowship groups want creative, interesting things, right? But ultimately, it's about following your heart and saying it with credibility that you care about it, that this is something that, you know, moves you at night. And, you know, if it doesn't like save the District of Columbia from the collapse of the financial crisis, it's okay. You're not going to do that. This is not, you know, for the Medal of Honor or the Peace Prize or anything. This is really just to try to attain a fellowship. And so we recognize your law students. You know, you may not have every legal theory, and that's okay. You should write it as though you are 3Ls or coming off of a clerkship. They're not expected to know the history of this kind of work. You need to know some, but I just want to ease your minds that you know, the creativity and the novelness and the number of people you're impacting, all those things are relative.
Great. Thank you very much. All righty. Oh yeah, Nita, go ahead.
Sorry, I know I keep interjecting, but in listening to the remarks, I just wanted to say two things, that unlike with the AmeriCorps Fellowship, where you can apply to more than one host site, with the traditional Equal Justice Works Fellowship, you're not allowed to, you know, apply and establish a relationship with the host organization and craft more than one proposal. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yep, an important distinction. I'm going to quickly close out Chapter 1 here and turn things over to Tim for Chapter 2. And I'll do that just with 3 quick points. The first one, Nita is a better ambassador, apparently, for my employer than I am. Nita has several times mentioned the PS LawNet website. If you're not familiar with that, that's pslawnet.org, and we run that out at NALP. And it's a big public interest jobs database. Almost I think every ABA accredited law school subscribes, which means that it's totally free for you to go on there and search for jobs. As for fellowships, I don't see her here tonight, but one of my summer colleagues, Maria Hibbard, has been, there she is, hello Maria, has been working with us to update the fellowship listings. And we're going to have about 340 fellowship listings all told in the next couple of weeks. There's already close to 300 on the website now. 150 of those are sponsors that are the potential host organizations who are out there seeking you. So if you haven't gone on to PS LawNet yet to look for fellowships, please do that. 2 other real quick points. They came up just, they were touched upon, but just a little bit. I would say that networking with alumni from your school who have succeeded with fellowship proposals in the past is huge. And this segues into my third. Go to your career development or career services office, work with the person there who's responsible for public interest counseling, and in the course of your work with him or her, ask if they can if you can connect with folks who've successfully done this from your school in the past. It's a great way to get insight on how people have succeeded, particularly from the school that you've come from. Alrighty, end of Chapter 1, beginning of Chapter 2, and I think this is just as important. Tim, thank you so much for your patience, and let's hear a little bit about the offerings within federal government on the fellowship line.
Great, so I want to spend a little bit of time with you talking about opportunities in the federal government, and clearly there are opportunities for attorneys in all 3 branches of government. What I want to talk about this evening is actually the executive branch, because that's what the Partnership for Public Service actually focuses on. I guess the first thing that I want to focus on is really why government. Why even consider government in any type of search that you're going through? First of all, good government really starts with good people, and that includes good attorneys as well. So if we want our government to be effective and actually meet the needs of our American citizens, we actually need good people who are providing those services. And hopefully that's all of you right here in this room. Secondly, like all of the nonprofits work that you heard about earlier, federal government is very much mission focused and, again, customer focused in being the American citizen. And I think I've spent a career actually in the nonprofit world, and I would say, quite frankly, that there's not a bigger stage to make a difference than working for the federal government, because frankly it influences everything else that every other nonprofit in the country and around the world actually does. Thirdly, clearly it's interesting and challenging work. And fourthly, given the number of hands from outside the DC area, too often we tend to think of federal government as being DC centric. 85% of the federal jobs are outside of the Washington, D.C. metro area. So it doesn't mean, for those of you who raised your hand saying you're here only for the summer, and there are two things that happen to students typically when they come to DC for the summer. They either develop Potomac fever and love it and don't want to leave, or they want to get out of here as fast as they can. So if you're one of those that want to get out of here as fast as you can, know that there are government opportunities elsewhere for you as well. Final point is actually two other points on why. The federal government is actually the single largest employer in the country. And certainly, because of that, it's also the single largest employer of attorneys as well. Overall, in an average year, the federal government brings in about 150,000 new employees. Those aren't all attorneys, but 150,000 new employees a year. Even with cutbacks in the federal workforce right now, simply due to retirements, the partnership is actually projecting that both this current fiscal year and probably next fiscal year, it'll still be bringing in close to 100,000 new employees in that given period. And then finally, regardless of what practice area you're looking at, whether it's litigation, policy, regulatory law, contract law, it doesn't matter. There are opportunities with the federal government. I think one of the things that we heard as a common theme in terms of looking at a place of employment is look for your dream job. Again, you can look at government and say, I want to do regulatory law or I want to do policy. But ultimately, there's a lot of different places that you can do that. My own advice to you is go where your heart is first, which is if you're really interested in environmental issues, EPA, for instance, has a ton of attorney jobs available for you. So don't simply focus on where do I think all the attorneys go, but base it on where your own heart goes in terms of its mission. I want to take a few minutes and talk about a few entry points into the federal government. The first being the Presidential Management Fellows Program, or the PMF program. And actually, the Office of Personnel Management right now is in the midst of enhancing that program. So I'm hoping that I'll cover some of the enhancements and not miss all of them, but I would also direct you to that website as well, which is pmf.gov. So first, through the PMF program, it's an excellent foray, particularly into the policy-making side of the federal government. Agencies cannot bring in litigators through the PMF program. So it is primarily policy-focused, the PMF program. It's a 2-year program that individuals are eligible for up to 2 years after they graduate, either undergrad or graduate, any type of professional type of schooling. You come in at either a GS-9, 11, or a 12. Just for a point of reference, a GS-9 in the DC area, the starting salary would be roughly about $63,000, which includes a locality pay as well. So that's kind of what you're looking at coming into the PMF program. It's really designed, that 2-year program, to be a training and development program, which is actually pretty cool, because while you're actually doing the job, you also have a lot of opportunity to be trained and again, developed to get a better sense both of the agency and the government at large. One of the really cool things about the PMF program is that there's a 4 to 6 month rotational program that's built into that program as well. A rotational program means that you may do it within your same agency and simply change the office that you're in for 4 to 6 months or longer. Or you could, in fact, go to another agency during that time period and get a glimpse of what they're doing and again, contribute to their mission as well. In the past, the PMF program has actually required a nomination from your school. One of the new enhancements that the Office of Personnel Management is rolling out is that is no longer actually the case. So you can apply directly to the Presidential Management Fellows Program without a recommendation from your law school. The application deadline is coming up, likely to be the end of October, although OPM is still finagling that a little bit. And in fact, just before I left the office, they sent me the test site to try to figure out if it works correctly. The first stage of the application process is really an online application. From there, they actually go to in-person interviews. And then ultimately, there's kind of the long dance between you and the agencies that you might, in fact, want to work at. Again, this is a great entry point because it really gives you a glimpse of an agency and work in the federal government. After those 2 years are over, the agency that you actually did your PMF with can either convert you to a term appointment, which means they could say, we want to actually hold on to you for the next 4 years because we don't have a full-time position available for you. Or if, in fact, they have a full-time position available for you, they can convert you to that full-time position. So again, it's a great training and development opportunity. Figure out whether or not it's the right fit for you, and also give the agency the opportunity to figure out if you're the right fit for them as well.
And if I may, as Tim mentioned, there's some horizontal mobility here that you can come out of a PMF, and maybe if you've had a great experience doing a rotation at an agency that you weren't hosted with and placed with initially, you might be able to make the jump over there. I have 3 good friends who are former PMFs, and 2 of them did that. They had great experiences while on shorter term rotations and found ways to leap horizontally over there at the end of their PMF time.
Hugely competitive program. This past year, there were about 8,000 applicants. The finalist list was probably about 900 folks, and there were actually roughly 650 that they're projecting for next year in terms of actually being placed. Again, the application deadline is probably late October. The process goes throughout the fall, and actually placement begins May, June, July, August. It can actually take longer as well. So that's the Presidential Management Fellows Program. Another entry point that I actually want to talk about, which is not really dissimilar to the Presidential Management Fellows Program, is a brand new program that just became effective yesterday. And it's called the Recent Graduate Program. The Recent Graduate Program works very much like the PMF program. It's actually just what it says. It's a recent graduate program. It's a hiring authority that allows federal agencies to streamline the hiring process and to bring in recent grads through a new hiring authority. What do they mean by recent grads? You have to have graduated within the last 2 years to actually apply for a recent graduate position. It applies, again, not only at the graduate level, but also at the undergrad level as well. It's a 1-year appointment. So unlike the PMF program, that's a 2-year appointment, this is a 1-year appointment. Again, it's designed to be a developmental appointment to give you an opportunity to figure out, is this really where I want to work? Is this the type of work that I want to do? And likewise, give the agency that opportunity to say, are you the right person for this agency as well? Again, it can lead to conversion either into a term appointment where, again, an agency might have a full-time position, but they've got a 4-year term appointment that they can put you into, and or it can lead to conversion to a full-time position. One of the things that the federal government has not been known for is its transparency in types of programs. So there have been programs like this in the past or similar to this, and they've been called 1,000 different names. Under the regulations that were released recently and the operating guidance around these, if you go to the primary website to find all government jobs, usajobs.gov, all recent graduate programs will have to be listed there. So you'll have one place that you can go. They'll at least be listed there. They may, in fact, then drive you to an individual agency website. But the second piece of that is that all of those programs, regardless of what agency it's at, will be actually called Recent Graduate Program. So all you have to do to put in a keyword search is look for Recent Graduate Program, and they'll pop up. So those are 2 entryways into government. I want to talk about a couple of other ones very quickly. If you go to pslawnet.org, you will also find a listing of a number of individual agencies' honors programs, specifically designed to bring in attorneys. There are some agencies that almost use the honors programs exclusively to bring in new attorneys, particularly at the entry level. You want to check that out. One of the challenges for all of you in looking at attorney positions within the federal government, if you don't go through a recent graduate program or the PMF program, is that attorney positions in the federal government are what are termed accepted service appointments. And there are 2 types of appointments in the federal government. One is competitive appointments. The other is accepted appointments. Competitive appointments mean that every agency has to put it out there for everyone basically in America to apply for and to compete for. Accepted service appointments means that if I find somebody on the street corner that I really like, I could basically offer them a job. Attorney positions in the federal government are accepted service appointments. So there isn't a requirement for government to post accepted service jobs anywhere. Now, with that said, and sorry to be the downer on that piece. With that said, most agencies actually do post their accepted service positions, particularly for attorneys, on usajobs.gov as well. And again, the key there is to also look at the individual agency honors programs, because again, so many agencies use that almost as their exclusive hiring of attorneys, particularly again at the entry level. So again, there isn't a need for public notice. Again, most of them do. If you go to USA Jobs and search for attorneys and you don't see many on there, then start rolling up your sleeves and saying, again, what is the mission that actually really motivates me? I'm interested in environmental law. I might want to look at EPA. Go to EPA's website, hit the employment tab, go in there, and more than likely, if they aren't listed on USA Jobs, even if it is an accepted service position, it will be listed on the individual agency website. So again, I think much like everybody else said, do your homework, know where you want to go, and uncover the resources. A couple of other things to mention very quickly. One of the things that you ought to look at with any type of position that you're looking at within the federal government, and again, something that government may not do necessarily really well, is advertise all of its benefits. Most agencies, if not all agencies, have the ability to offer loan repayment assistance. And that is particularly true for folks in legal careers. You may not see a single thing on EPA's website as it relates to an entry-level attorney position about offering loan repayment assistance. You have to ask them and say, do you offer? And if not, why? And can you offer? So push them, because every agency actually has the ability to do that. Whether or not they use it is actually at their discretion. So a lot of times they won't advertise it because actually, to be honest, they don't want to be able to, they don't want to have to provide loan assistance to everybody given limited budgets, but they do have it in their back pocket to pull out to ensure that the good candidates don't get away if that's the barrier to employment for them. So make sure that you also put that in your back pocket for any conversation that you have, which is, do you in fact offer loan assistance, loan repayment assistance? Finally, I want to highlight a couple of resources. PS LawNet, which has been mentioned numerous times.
You guys are great. Thank you.
usajobs.gov, again, you will find a host of opportunities there. Again, specifically as it relates to the recent grad program, there's a tab right below the homepage that says Students and Recent Grads. If you click on that, it should take you to Students and Recent Grads opportunities. Student opportunities that list are really internships, which also don't bypass internships if you're actually looking for internships as well, because that's the other revision. In the past, there were the government had convoluted internship programs that they didn't call internships. They actually call them internships now. And internships, actually all internships now lead to, or actually anybody who comes in through an internship program is eligible but not entitled to conversion. So they're actually normalizing with the rest of society in terms of the way that they deal with internships. The other one, again, pmf.gov for the Presidential Management Fellows Program. I'd actually also encourage you to take a look at two other websites that are actually partnership websites. One is gogovernment.org. I think it's probably the best resource out there in terms of how to navigate the federal hiring process and how to kind of conduct your search regardless of where you're going. And the reason that I say it's probably one of the best ones out there is if usajobs.gov actually links to this as a resource for people to find it, then you know that you're onto something when the Office of Personnel Management actually is linking to a private nonprofit organization's website. And the last website that I would refer you to is servicetoamericamedals.org. And the reason that I'll refer you there is it's easy to talk about great work that federal employees do. It's really hard to see that every day when you turn on the news. Instead, what you read about is waste, fraud, and abuse. Service to America Medals is a program that the partnership operates to recognize outstanding contributions of federal employees. And there are some amazing stories of federal employees making a difference all across the country and around the world. Great videos, but also you can read some of the great stories that actually attorneys and others in legal professions are doing within the federal government as well. And I think it's actually a great inspirational site to go to. So check that out. Again, thank you for your time. And Steve, thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim. And I would just close out Chapter 2, and we'll get to questions, as I closed out Chapter 1, which is to say touch base with your Career Development Office when you're back on federal positions, precisely for the reason that Tim articulated, which is that wholesale square one changes, which are bound to be good in the long run, were just implemented, but the rollout and the implementation, agency by agency, is going to be tricky. And having been on the phone several times with a lot of your career services folks in the past couple of weeks, they're all finger on the pulse with that now, so touch base with them. With that, let me open it up. I'm sure we have some questions in the room, so I'll open it up to that. And if you're afraid of falling down the steps coming to the microphone, I will gladly, you can speak from your seat, and I will gladly mouth the question into the mic. So start over here.
Hello. So I had a question about the sponsorship, the hosts, employers that you're be looking at. The question I had was, if you go back and you look at the history of these past fellows and you see what kind of programs they've done in the past projects, is it a bad idea to model your own project, with past projects? Or, do they look at it, well, this is too similar to a past project, we're not going to take it, we're not going to sponsor it?
Yeah. As I said before, you want to try to address the legal problem in a novel way, but there have been instances where particular projects that were funded were similar to another project. So I would say no, especially in the same issue area, like immigration or something like that. We encourage you to be creative and novel, but there is going to be, after so many fellowships, some duplication.
Yep. Over here.
Hi, I had one question for Nita and then one for Tim. Nita, for the Equal Justice Works fellowships, you mentioned that they're not necessarily right after graduation or after a clerkship. Does that just vary by the fellowship?
Well, let me clarify. The Equal Justice Works traditional fellowship, you would apply when you're a rising 3L. So because it's a year ahead. If you get a judicial clerkship, we can't defer the fellowship because each year our funding sources vary. So are you a...
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, does it have to directly follow either a clerkship or graduation?
Well, you can also be a recent graduate to apply for the fellowships within a couple of years of graduating. You can also apply, but we do try to encourage it for recent graduates, not like somebody who's like 15 years out or something like that.
But even if you've been working for like a year or two, you can
yeah,
still,
exactly.
Okay.
Definitely.
And then Tim, you mentioned that after the application process and the interview process, that then you start the placement process. So is it kind of a general application, and then after you get accepted, you narrow it down?
Yeah, so it is a general application process, and then from there, agencies basically are going to, actually at this point, are trying to decide what types of folks they need to bring in through the PMF program, for example, and then once you apply, they're going to get the list. You'll go through the application process, you'll go through the vetting process, in-person interviews, and then from there, there's a number of finalists that are actually named. And then from that point, basically, agencies can go in there and pick people off and say, I actually want to talk to this person, I don't want to talk to this person.
Great. Here.
All right, I have two questions. My first one, I think, goes for all of the fellowships. If you apply as a rising 3L and then you are accepted for a clerkship, can you apply again the next year?
You can apply again the next year, yes.
Okay, is that the same for Skadden?
For Skadden, I don't think it would come up because the application's due October 1st, which is after the Oscar thing, right? The one thing I'll say, though, is there is some negotiation with an organization, right? There's time when you're sort of finding an organization to sponsor you, and if you're also applying to clerkships, they're going to want to know that, and it's a little delicate because they're going to want to know if you got a clerkship, would you accept it? And that happens before the application is due to Skadden.
Okay, and my second question, unless
Actually, I'm going to chime in real quick on the PMF. Yes, you can, but the thing to be aware of with the PMF program is they're actually the timing of the two of classes overlap. So if in fact you were to apply for the 2013 class in October, and then you got a clerkship and you wanted to apply again, if you could do that, but if in fact somebody wanted to pull you in the class of 2013, because you've actually gone somewhere else, you've actually negated your 2013 acceptance and you have to apply all over again.
Okay, okay. And my second question, I think, is more for the Skadden and the Equal Justice Works Fellowships. You talked about affecting a certain population. Have there been candidates or fellows who have done fellowship projects that are internationally based?
Unfortunately, for the Equal Justice Works traditional fellowships, currently they all have to be domestic-based. I can tell you that we are actually looking into the possibility of international fellowships, but nothing is concrete as of right now.
I think that someone is in London now, and you would want to check on the Skadden website about that. But traditionally, it's domestic.
Well, I should clarify. What about organizations that are here, like based here in the U.S., but do international type work? Is it still the same with Answer with Equal Justice Works, or?
Most of the organizations are domestic-based, but I can actually, that's a good question, that hasn't come up yet. I can actually ask Sarah, our fellowships guru, and get back to you if you want to give me your email address.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I think for both, historically, it's had more to do with where the fellow is based, which is to say that the programs were centered to be serving domestic populations in need. So hearing that someone's in London suggests that that may have changed, but that's historically why the two have been limited to U.S.-based fellowships. Here.
Okay. I have two questions in there for Tim. My first question is, the last time I looked at the PMF stuff was 2 years ago. And is there still a testing component to the PMF?
Yes. So your initial application is really a battery of tests.
Okay.
And then from there, you will actually progress, which includes an essay. Really, what they're going to look at first and foremost is actually your commitment to public service. Again, look at this truly as a pathway into government and into public service. If you simply want to use this as an experience then to leverage yourself into corporate law, I would say that you're likely not going to make it through the PMF process.
Okay. And then my second question is, are most of the jobs in the PMF fellowship program, are they located in DC, or can you take a?
So actually, no, they are not. The majority are, yes, but again, OPM for the class of 2013, which would actually be applying in October, placed next summer, early part of the fall. They're anticipating about 650 placements. Probably about 60% of those will be in DC. The other 40% likely outside of the DC area.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Ann?
Hi. I appreciate hearing about the executive branch fellowships, and I'm wondering if you or anyone else on the panel has recommendations of other policy-based fellowships, either organizational or maybe on the legislative side. I don't know if that's in anybody's wheelhouse, but.
Oh, you're all looking at me. There are, I will say this, and it's not going to help you too much. There are fellowships on the Hill. Yale Law School does every year a guide, of which there is a public version available, called something like Working on Capitol Hill, and it's obviously intended for law graduates. So we house that on PS LawNet in our Career Central page, but Yale also has it, and they update it annually. So if it's not updated now, I suspect you'd be able to download the one version of that guide, which is available to all law students sometimes very soon. There are fellowship opportunities available on the Hill. As for nonprofit organizations that do policy-based fellowships, that's harder. I would look at, and this isn't going to be as, I don't mean it's to be as self-serving as it sounds, but PS LawNet's going to have a whole ton of think tanks and larger shops that do public interest policy, like the ACLU. ACLU does a ton of litigation. That's probably what they're known for. But a lot of that is policy driven. And so the ACLU has had historically a whole lot of organization-based fellowships, some of which are much more integrated in policy work than they are in doing actual courtroom work. So I would check some of the bigger outfits, including a lot of the think tanks here in Washington.
Thank you all so much for being here. Obviously, it's super helpful, but my question is mostly regarding Skadden and EJW, and I was wondering if they typically are okay funding fellowships that are placed in nonprofits which are religiously affiliated, even if the work that they're doing is not religiously affiliated, like a Catholic Charities, for example.
I believe the answer is yes to that, but again, I'm going to check with Sarah Snick, and if you see me after the panel, I can just confirm that.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes as well. And again, check the Skadden website.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that I've known fellows who've worked with organizations that are religiously based themselves. And I'm not sure if and how that interplayed with the work that the fellow did, but I don't think the host organization being religiously affiliated is an issue. Yep.
My question's more for Tim, two of them actually. This conversion on the internships, is that counting for this year's summer interns?
So if somebody, I assume you're in an agency, so if that's the case, if somebody hasn't had a conversation with you yet, you ought to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, they had a thing today and they had no idea what was going on with the advanced commit program, so.
So see me afterward and I'll point you in the right direction.
And then I guess the other question would be for all of these, because the federal government has the loan repayment program after 10 years of public service, either in a nonprofit or with the federal government. Do these either 2 years or 1 year program, can that count towards that 10-year repayment program?
So the PMF program and the recent grad program will actually count as that piece, because ultimately when they make the conversion, that will be counted as part of your federal service.
And speaking for the fellowship programs, I would assume that because one of the requirements is that you work with a nonprofit organization, then by virtue of that federal law, which is the sort of larger federal loan repayment law, which includes two components, income-based repayment and public service loan forgiveness, the latter portion of which you're speaking about. One of the requirements there is to work with a nonprofit as part of that loan forgiveness run-up 10-year period. So I would think that the answer is yes.
I hesitate to respond to this because it's been a while since I did loan repayment, and things have changed a lot. But at least when I did it, my law school offered something, the Skadden Fellowship Program offered something, and there was some amount of trying to figure out where is the best, financially the best deal, and you want to check that out. And to the extent that the federal government also kind of looks into this, you may want to look and see if you participate in this, does it count? If you participate in that, doesn't. So once you're there, you might want to actually talk to your law school and have them help you with that process, or Skadden or whatever fellowship program.
This could actually, as you all probably know, be an entire 2-3 hour program, right? So loan repayment, how to manage debt. It's a really important one. It's a question you have to be asking yourself now while in law school. I would say that two great resources to go to, and I want to return a favor to Nita here. Equal Justice Works has done terrific work and continues to do so on student debt. Go to the Equal Justice Works website to learn not only about these federal offerings, but also how they interplay with your own law schools that have LRAPs. Some states have LRAPs. So it's an awfully confusing patchwork, but it's kind of a happy problem to think that you can access different kinds of LRAP resources out there. And ask HeatherJarvis.com. Heather Jarvis is a friend of ours who is an educational debt consultant who used to work with Equal Justice Works. She also has tremendous expertise in this and can steer you in the right direction. So both those websites.
And one of the handouts that I brought is actually our upcoming webinar schedule, and you'll see several loan repayment, educational debt relief webinars.
Yeah, it ain't easy to make that a fun topic for a webinar, and they do a really, really good job with it. So I commend you to take a look at this. Over here.
Thank you. This is more directed at Tim, but anyone who might be able to speak to this. For people who are interested more in litigation and government work, there's 5 positions open through the honors program. That's a slight exaggeration. But if you don't get in through the honors to get in, do you recommend a certain pathway? I've heard some people recommend more private practice before they transition in. to you.
Yeah, so clearly one of the reasons for both the PMF program and also the new recent grad program is federal government hiring relies heavily on experience. So getting in, particularly in litigation roles, is sometimes challenging. I think clearly don't be discouraged. And yes, private practice is something that will give you experience as well. But again, don't be discouraged simply because you see five on the website. Look a little deeper as well, because again, that may be through an honors program, but that may be one component of how an agency brings litigators on as well.
And this is totally anecdotal. I have a friend doing PMF right now, and even though his sort of main position is policy, he's on a rotation at the U.S. attorneys right now. For about 6 months, and there are many people who temporarily cycle into that office through that.
Yep. I can take, I think, maybe one more question, and I saw a hand go up here. Sir, you stood up. I'll get you too. But go ahead, please.
This question is actually for Tim, and I don't know if this was more of a rumor versus truth, but I had heard that in the PMF program, there'd sort of been a dramatic scale back in the number of law students that they were accepting. And I was wondering if you happen to know if there is any truth to that, and if so, if that's the trend that's going to continue into the future.
So it's actually,
and Tim, if I may, just to read it in for the recording, the question was, Mr. McManus, to put you on the spot, there has been rumor that there has been a scale back in the number of law graduates who comprise that portion of the Presidential Management Fellows Program. Is that true?
So yes and no. And the reason I say yes and no is frankly, there's not hard evidence on this. I actually just met with OPM earlier this week on the PMF program in general. And one of the things that they're trying to do is get a handle on the specific backgrounds, because the PMF program is actually unusual. OPM actually is responsible for the entire outreach and selection of the candidates, but then once the candidates are selected, the agencies actually take over and do the hiring of those candidates, kind of back to your question again. So ultimately, going forward, will there be? There may, but that's not going to be driven by anything but needs of agencies. And I could tell you my own personal opinion is one of the things that agencies most look for in candidates coming through the PMF program is less about what the academic background or credentialing of anybody is, but rather is skill-based. And I think they're really looking at really two types of things that play most upon people. One is critical thinking skills, and two is leadership competencies or abilities. So to that point, I'd actually say that law students actually have a good leg up on a lot of other folks in the process. I think ultimately it's yet to play out, given that there won't be a school nomination piece in play, because historically there have been two types of schools that have been the primary feeder into the PMF program. Law schools and schools of public policy and public administration. Now that there's no nomination process there, I believe that it will actually open the floodgates to a lot of other candidates, which may in fact be propelling what I would call the myth right now, that the numbers are dwindling.
All right, and sir, final question.
Yeah, hopefully it's a quick question. Thank you all for coming this evening. Mr. McManus, can you talk about, so you spoke about the accepted service and the competitive service. Can you talk about how being a former employee of the competitive service affects hiring in any of the government programs that you talked about?
Great question. If you were in a competitive position and then you went back to law school or whatever, you still have what is called status.
Right.
And as a status employee, you're going to actually have some preference, basically, through the competitive hiring process. So again, it should play in your favor. You want to make sure, though, that both on the application, both on the website, if it asks whether or not you're a status candidate, you say yes. But you also want to make darn sure that in your application packet that you make sure that they're aware that you actually have status, and you actually show you should have an SF50 or 51, whatever it is, that you can forward with your packet as well, that actually shows that you were in government in a competitive situation, and that should actually help the process.
Great. Yeah, that's a great question to close with. There are refreshments available for us, and I trust that you'll be directed to them once we walk out in the back here. But just before we all leave, please join me in thanking our panel tonight. All right. Thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your summers.
Nice meeting everyone. I have to dash to my meter. They're very busy.